Madelyn Knox spilled coffee on her blouse 5 minutes before her first shift as the new receptionist at the Prescott Hotel. And that was before she even stepped inside. "Great," she muttered, scrubbing the damp spot with a napkin while the doorman tried very hard not to laugh. The Prescott wasn't just any hotel. It was the kind of place where celebrities stayed quietly, where CEOs booked entire floors, and where the cheapest espresso cost more than her entire lunch. Madelyn had no clue how she'd landed the job probably, because she didn't ask too many questions during the interview and said, "Thank you, too much." But after 3 months of job hunting, she'd take anything. The lobby was a palace, marble floors, gold accents, a chandelier so massive it looked like it could crush a car. She stepped behind the front desk, gave herself a quick pep talk, and forced a smile as the first guest approached. By noon, her cheeks hurt from pretending she wasn't terrified, but she was getting the hang of it until he walked in. He didn't just walk. He moved like he owned the air. Slate gray suit, sunglasses pushed into thick dark hair, jawline that looked like it had been carved by someone angry. He said nothing at first, setting his black leather duffel on the counter and pulling off his sunglasses slowly like the world could wait. Madelyn glanced at the reservation screen. "Good afternoon, welcome to the Prescott. Do you have a reservation?" He looked at her for a second. Like really looked. "I do. Van Mercer." She nearly choked. The name was familiar. Not from a tabloid, not from a movie, no, it was bigger than that. Mercer Ventures, Mercer Global, Mercer Foundation, clicked like a dropped coin. He was Van Mercer, the billionaire. She swallowed. Mr. Mercer, of course. One moment. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled up his reservation. Full penthouse suite. 3 nights. Private elevator access. It was all there. "You're all set," she said, sliding over the keycard. "Would you like someone to bring your bags up?" He lifted the duffel easily. "I travel light." Then came the surprise. As he turned to leave, he paused. Looked her up and down again this time, slower. "First day." Madelyn blinked. "What gave it away?" "The panic in your eyes," he said, almost smiling. She huffed a laugh. "Glad to know it's subtle." He didn't say anything else, just nodded and disappeared into the elevator. She let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding, heart pounding. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but her brain kept circling back to him. Van Mercer. Why had he looked at her like that? The next morning, he was back in the lobby. No duffel this time, just a phone in hand and a coffee from the cafe across the street. "Morning," he said, standing by the desk, not even pretending to be casual. Madelyn straightened. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer. How can I help you?" "Van," he corrected. She hesitated. "All right, Van." He leaned on the counter. "You're not from around here." She raised an eyebrow. "What gave that away?" "The coffee stain on your blouse yesterday. Locals know better than to challenge the wind near 5th Avenue. Madelyn blinked, surprised he'd noticed. "Good to know." He tilted his head. "Where are you from?" "St. Clair. Small town." "Not on most maps." "Never heard of it." "Exactly." He grinned, and for a second he looked less like a billionaire and more like a guy who just liked annoying people for fun. That became the beginning of something strange. He came down every morning after that. Sometimes he asked about her day. Sometimes he brought her coffee. Once he asked her what she was reading. She told him it was a thriller, and the next morning he brought her the sequel. "You didn't even ask which one I was on," she said, stunned. He shrugged, sipping his espresso. "You seem like someone who reads fast." She didn't know what to do with that. It didn't make sense. Why was a man like Van Mercer spending his mornings chatting with a receptionist? By the end of the week, she started looking forward to seeing him come down the elevator. But the thing that really shook her happened on Friday. A woman in heels sharp enough to kill someone strutted up to the desk. "I'm here to see Van Mercer," she said, glossy lips pursed. Madelyn blinked. "Do you have an appointment?" The woman rolled her eyes. "Tell him it's Lacey." "He'll want to see me." Madelyn picked up the phone, hesitating. That was when Van came out of the elevator himself, stopping mid-step when he saw the woman. "Lacey," he said carefully. "Didn't expect to see you." She strode over, all confidence and perfume. "Come on, Van. One drink." Madelyn looked away, pretending to organize brochures. Van's voice was low. "Not interested." Lacey's expression faltered. "You serious?" He stepped aside, nodding toward the elevators. "I've got a meeting." Lacey huffed, spun on her heels, and left without another word. Van walked up to the desk like nothing had happened. Madelyn looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." He raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Shut her down. You didn't know me that." He leaned on the counter again. "She's not my type." "Blonde? Tall? Gorgeous?" Madelyn asked. He shook his head. "Loud? Fake? Pushy?" She tried to laugh it off, but he wasn't smiling. "I like real," he said, voice softer now. "I like people who don't pretend." Her heart hammered in her chest. She cleared her throat. "Well, I'm definitely not good at pretending." "Exactly." She looked down at her hands. He stepped back. "I'll see you tomorrow." But he didn't wait for an answer. Madelyn stood there long after he was gone, cheeks warm, heart confused. Because billionaires didn't flirt with receptionists. And yet he was. The next week, Van Mercer didn't show up in the lobby. Not Monday. Not Tuesday. Not even a glimpse of him by Wednesday. Madelyn tried not to care. She told herself it was ridiculous to notice a guest's absence, especially one who probably jetted off on business at a moment's notice. Still, every time the elevator doors opened, her stomach twisted in anticipation. By Thursday, she forced herself to stop looking. She greeted guests, organized packages, and pretended her chest didn't tighten every time someone in a tailored suit walked past. She was restocking the brochure display near the concierge desk when a voice behind her said, "You don't organize those alphabetically, do you?" She turned too fast and nearly dropped the stack in her hands. Then stood there in a charcoal coat, his hair tousled from the wind and a faint shadow along his jaw. His eyes were sharper than she remembered, like something had shifted. "I don't," she said, straightening. "Should I?" "Depends. If someone's looking for a wine tour but ends up booking a helicopter ride instead, I'd say you've done your job." "Is that how business works for you?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. "I had to fly to Zurich. Board meeting. Didn't plan on being gone that long." She didn't ask why he was telling her that. Instead, she said, "Hope it went well." He took a step closer. "I should have said goodbye. You don't owe me that." "Maybe not," he said. "But I wanted to." Madelyn couldn't think of a reply fast enough. He glanced at her name tag, then back up. "Can you get a break?" he asked. She blinked. "Why?" "I owe you a coffee. One that doesn't involve dodging traffic or wind." She hesitated, glancing at the assistant manager, who pretended not to be listening but was clearly listening. "I get 15 minutes, she said slowly. "I'll take it," he said. They ended up at the cafe across the street, tucked into a corner table away from the windows. The place smelled like cinnamon and espresso, and Van didn't even look at the menu before ordering for both of them. "You're confident," she said as the barista walked away. "I read people quickly. And what do I read like?" He studied her. Someone who doesn't like small talk. Someone who notices everything but never says it out loud. She looked down at her hands. "That's not wrong. I've met a lot of people who talk to be heard. You don't. It's rare." She felt heat rising to her cheeks and quickly changed the subject. "Why the Prescott? You could stay anywhere in the city. I like the privacy, and the staff doesn't leak things to the press." "I'm guessing that's happened before." "More than once." Their drinks arrived. She picked up her cup and took a sip. It was perfect. "You ever think about doing something else?" he asked suddenly. "Something outside of hotels?" She raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "I don't know. You've got a sharp way of looking at things. You'd be wasted in admin work." Should I take that as a compliment or an insult? Whichever gets me forgiven for asking. She smiled despite herself. "I used to want to be a writer. What changed?" "Life," she said simply. "Bills. Reality. I got tired of rejection letters." Van didn't respond right away. Then he leaned back in his chair. "You should try again." "Easy for you to say." "No, it's not," he said quietly. "It's not easy to admit when you've lost something you cared about." She looked at him then, really looked. There was something under his words, something unspoken. "What did you lose?" she asked. He didn't dodge the question. "My brother." Her heart sank. "I'm sorry. It was years ago. But sometimes it still feels like yesterday." She didn't press. Instead, she said, "I lost my dad when I was 17. He was the only person who ever read my stories without editing them." Van nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why I like talking to you. You're not afraid of silence." They finished their drinks in quiet understanding. When they stood, he pulled open the cafe door for her, then paused outside. "I hate goodbyes," he said. "Then don't say it." He smiled, not a grin, not a smirk, just something quiet, real. "I'll see you soon." She crossed the street alone, her fingers still warm from the cup, her thoughts unraveling faster than she could keep up. Back at the desk, she resumed her shift, but nothing felt the same. Not the lobby lighting, not the buzz of conversations, not even the polished marble beneath her heels. That night, after her shift ended, she found a note tucked under her purse in the staff locker room. No signature, just a short message in neat handwriting. "Don't give up on your stories. The world needs more truth." She didn't need to guess who it was from. And for the first time in years, she pulled out one of her old notebooks from the bottom of a drawer, opened a blank page, and began to write. The invitation came 3 days later. Not a note this time, not a casual coffee or a quiet walk back across the street. This was a formal envelope sealed with a gold wax stamp and left discreetly at the front desk by one of the hotel's concierge staff. Madelyn opened it behind the privacy of the staff hallway and stared down at the elegant calligraphy. "You are cordially invited to the Prescott Foundation Gala. Saturday at 8 o'clock. Black tie. Transportation will be arranged." She read it twice, blinking hard at her name printed beneath the date. Not guest of, not a +1. Just her. Alone. She didn't ask anyone who sent it. She already knew. That evening, after her shift ended, she stepped into the break room to find a garment bag hanging on the locker door with a small tag clipped to the zipper. Where this it read, "I'll be waiting." No signature. No explanation. She hesitated before unzipping it. Inside was a midnight blue gown with delicate straps and a subtle shimmer that caught the light like moonlit water. It was sophisticated, understated, nothing like the puffed-up ball gowns in the magazines. Someone had chosen it with care. Someone who knew she wouldn't want to be the center of attention but also wouldn't mind being seen. Saturday arrived faster than she expected. A sleek black car pulled up in front of her apartment building just after 7. The driver greeted her by name and opened the door with a quiet nod. On the seat beside her waited a small velvet box. She hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside, nestled in white satin, sat a pair of teardrop sapphire earrings. She didn't put them on right away. Not until the car turned onto the private drive of the Prescott's event center and her reflection in the tinted glass looked like someone else entirely, someone confident, composed, and utterly out of place. The gala was already in full swing when she stepped inside. Crystal chandeliers bathed the marble floors in golden light. Towering arrangements of orchids and white roses lined the grand staircase. Waiters moved like clockwork, balancing trays of champagne and tiny hors d'oeuvres. Madelyn paused just inside the entrance, heart thudding. Then she saw him. Van stood near the base of the staircase, speaking to an older man in a navy tuxedo. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw clean-shaven. A black bow tie sat perfectly centered beneath his crisp collar. He looked up mid-conversation, and the moment their eyes met, he stopped talking. The man beside him followed his gaze, gave a subtle nod, and stepped aside without a word. Van crossed the room in 10 strides. "You wore it," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure if I should." "I was." She glanced around. "This is a lot." He offered his arm. "Come with me." She hesitated only a second before slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. He led her through the crowd with ease, nodding politely at guests but never stopping. They reached a balcony that overlooked the city skyline, where the music faded into the background and the cool air softened the heat of the ballroom lights. "I didn't know the Prescott had this view," she said. "Most people don't bother to look for it." She stepped to the edge, fingers brushing the stone railing. Below, the city glittered like 1,000 secrets. He watched her carefully, then said, "I didn't invite you here to impress you." "Why did you?" "I needed you to see my world," he said, "so I could ask you something and know you'd understand." She turned. "Ask me what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope, holding it out. She took it slowly, opening the flap. Inside was a letter of offer on Mercer Ventures' letterhead addressed to her. Position: Executive Assistant to the CEO. Full relocation package. Salary higher than anything she'd ever imagined. Her breath caught. "This is real," he said, "but not what you think. I'm not trying to buy you or sweep you away from your life." "Then what is this?" "I want you close," he said. "Not because I need a new assistant. Because I need someone who tells the truth. Someone who doesn't bend just because I'm who I am." She looked down at the paper, then back at him. "Van, this is insane. We barely know each other. I know you're honest. I know you're loyal. I know you'd never take advantage of me. That's more than I know about people I've worked with for years." She folded the offer back into the envelope. "And what if I say no?" He stepped closer. "Then I'll still come down to the lobby every morning. I'll still find reasons to run into you. I'll still ask how your night was. But I won't pretend I don't want more." Her pulse roared in her ears. "I need time," she said. "You've got it." They stood in silence, the city humming below them. She watched the lights flicker and shift, a million lives unfolding beneath their feet. When they returned to the ballroom, something had changed. People looked at her differently. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. She realized then Van hadn't just brought her as a date. He'd brought her as something more. A statement. A choice. She didn't let go of his arm for the rest of the night. Later, much later, they stood outside while the valet pulled up a waiting car. He turned to her, voice low. "Madelyn, I've spent years surrounded by people who want something from me. You're the first person who never asked for anything." She met his gaze. "Maybe I didn't have to." He reached up, adjusting the sapphire earring gently against her skin. "You'll tell me when you decide." She nodded. The car door opened, and she slid in, her heart a storm of questions and answers she wasn't ready to say aloud. As the city lights blurred past the window, one thing settled in her chest with quiet certainty. She wasn't part of his world. But for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to stay out of it. Rain slicked the streets 2 weeks later when Madelyn stepped off the elevator not behind the front desk, but onto the executive floor of Mercer Ventures. She hadn't said yes right away. She'd taken days to think through the offer, days of pacing her apartment with the envelope unopened on the kitchen counter, days of filling pages in her old notebook with pros and cons. She'd written the word safe 12 times. Then she crossed it out every time. In the end, she didn't say yes because of the job. She said yes because she finally wanted to stop running from the life she thought she didn't deserve. Van hadn't pressured her. He hadn't called. He hadn't shown up again in the lobby. Instead, the silence gave her space, and that's how she knew his offer had been real. Now she stood in the hallway outside his office, holding a slim folder of onboarding paperwork, her heels clicking softly against polished stone. The receptionist, this one in designer heels and with a headset curled around her ear, gave her a quick nod. "Mr. Mercer's expecting you." Madelyn stepped through the glass door, then looked up from a sleek mahogany desk, the skyline stretching wide behind him. He stood before she even crossed the room. "Welcome to the other side," he said. She let out a breath. "It's very tall." "You get used to the height," he said. "But not the pressure." She walked to the edge of the floor to ceiling window. You really see the whole city from here? Not all of it, he said, joining her. Just the part you think you control. She turned. You're not what I expected. I get that a lot. This is still strange, she admitted. I'm not sure how I fit here. He watched her. Then let's figure it out together. Over the next 10 days, Madelyn discovered that working for Van Mercer was nothing like working reception. She no longer answered to a schedule of check-ins or room service complaints. Now she coordinated international calls, reviewed investor briefs, and once by accident told the CEO of a rival company that his tone was condescending. Van hadn't fired her for that. He'd laughed. Then sent her 24 roses with a card that said, "For saying what I couldn't." They worked late often. Not because he demanded it, but because the energy in his office never seemed to fade. She learned that he took his coffee black when he was trying to focus and added cinnamon when he was anxious. She learned he hated boardroom jargon, refused to let anyone call his assistant just staff, and kept a photo of a sailboat on his desk that he never explained. One night, long after the office had emptied and the lights of the city buzzed like 1,000 quiet promises, Van stood beside her at the conference table littered with reports. "Why did you really take the job?" he asked. "I wanted to be braver," she said. "I wanted to stop making myself small." He folded his arms. "You were never small. I was. Or I made myself that way." It's easy to disappear when no one's looking for you. He stepped closer. "I was looking." She met his gaze. "And now? I'm not looking anymore." The air between them tightened, but she didn't step back. She whispered, "Is this a mistake?" "Probably," he said. "But I don't care." His hand brushed her cheek, hesitant, careful, not commanding. She could have stopped him with a breath. She didn't. When he kissed her, it wasn't the kiss of a man used to getting everything. It was the kiss of a man who knew what it meant to lose and still chose to risk it. The next morning, she didn't walk through the front of the building. She entered through the executive entrance, head held high, and no one questioned it. Days passed. Then a week. Then another. Rumors stirred because they always did. But Van never hid. He never asked her to lie or pretend. When one of the board members made a pointed comment about blurred lines, Van's reply was, "If you're worried about optics, maybe worry about your quarterly numbers instead." Still, not everything was smooth. One afternoon, she stepped into his office to find him pacing in front of the window, jaw tight. "What happened?" He held out a tablet with a news headline glowing across it. Mercer's new assistant or something more. A photo of them at the gala filled the screen. She read the article. Every word was speculation: her background, her appearance, her clothing. No mention of her work. No mention of her ideas. Just gossip. "They're calling me a distraction," she said. "You're not. They think I'm temporary." He lowered the tablet. "They're wrong." She crossed the room to him. "Then prove it." His eyes sharpened. "How?" "Not with a statement. Not with a press release. Do something that can't be undone." The next day, Van walked into the quarterly shareholder meeting with her beside him. He didn't sit at the head of the table. He stood. "I'm restructuring the leadership committee," he said. "Effective immediately, we'll be forming a new unit focused on long-term creative development, backing early-stage startups that don't meet traditional growth models. Madelyn Knox will be heading that team." She didn't flinch. One of the older board members frowned. "She has no financial background." "She has vision," Van replied. "And that's what we've lacked." Afterward, she found him in the hallway. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. I wanted to. I'm not going to be easy," she warned. "I overthink everything. I'll probably challenge you in meetings. I'll never stop asking why something is done the way it is." He smiled, not wide, but slow and certain. "Good. I've been surrounded by yes men for too long. I'm not going to be your yes woman. I'm counting on it." That night, they didn't go to a gala. They didn't dine at a rooftop restaurant or fly anywhere. They went back to her apartment where she made pasta that turned out a little overcooked, and he helped her fix a crooked cabinet door that had been bothering her for months. He didn't try to impress her. He just sat on her worn couch, took off his watch, and asked her about the story she was writing. Not a press story. Not a memo. Her story. She read it to him, shaky at first, then stronger. When she finished, he touched her hand. That was beautiful. It's still rough. So am I. She laughed, and it caught in her throat. He didn't say anything grand. No poetic declarations. Just this: let's build something that doesn't need perfect beginnings. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And for once, she didn't think about how far she'd come or how impossible it all had seemed. She just let herself be in the moment with the man who hadn't just seen her. He'd chosen her. Madelyn leaned against the glass wall of the conference room, watching the last of the investors file out after the quarterly update. The tension in the room had shifted over the past month. Her ideas were no longer questioned with veiled condescension, and her presence no longer drew curious glances. She had earned her place here, not through proximity to Van, but through results. 4 startup grants had been approved under her leadership. 2 were already showing early returns. She wasn't just building something for him, she was building something that had her name on it, too. "You should stop hovering," Van said from behind her, adjusting the cuff of his shirt as he joined her by the window. They were impressed. They weren't unimpressed, she countered. "That's not the same thing." He tilted his head. "You want applause? I want to stop feeling like I'm about to be asked to leave the room. You haven't just earned your seat at the table, Madelyn. You redesigned it." She looked at him carefully. "You always say things that sound like they belong in frame quotes." He leaned slightly closer. "That's because I only mean them when I'm talking to you." She folded her arms, but the corner of her mouth lifted. "You're getting better at this." "Better at what?" "Not hiding." He didn't deny it. Instead, he glanced down at the tablet in his hand and tapped the screen before handing it to her. She scrolled through the document, her brows knitting. "Is this a restructure proposal?" "It's more than that," he said. "It's a separation." She looked up sharply. "You're stepping down?" "From the CEO position," he confirmed. "I'm retaining majority stake and board influence. But it's time." "Why?" "Because the company doesn't need me to run every detail. It needs space to grow. And I need space to build something else." "With me?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the hum of the city below. "With us." She exhaled slowly, the weight of his words settling over her like a warmth she hadn't known she was missing. "Where would we go?" "Anywhere. Everywhere. Wherever you want to write. Wherever we can breathe." She studied his face. "You've always breathed just fine in skyscrapers." "Not really," he said. "I just got good at pretending." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the far side of the room and looked out at the horizon where the sky cracked open into the haze of late afternoon light. "If you do this, it changes everything." "I know," he said, stepping behind her. "But you changed everything anyway." She turned to face him. "Then I guess we're even." "I don't want even," he said quietly. "I want forever." Her breath caught. He pulled something from his pocket. Not a ring box, not a dramatic gesture, just a worn piece of paper, folded in half. She opened it. It was one of her early story outlines, the one she'd read to him the night they sat on her couch. But now in the margins were notes. His notes. In his handwriting. Suggestions, ideas, encouragement. Every word reflected someone who'd not just listened but believed. "You kept this." "I want to publish it," he said. "Under your name. With your voice. Through a new foundation, I've started a creative endowment for unheard storytellers." Her eyes filled. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." She stepped closer, her hand curling around the paper. "I don't care about boardrooms or foundations or penthouses, Van. I care about waking up next to you and knowing I'm not a passing phase." "You're not," he said. "You're the only part that feels permanent." He reached into his jacket again, and this time there was a ring box. She looked at him, stunned. I wasn't either," he admitted. "But I don't want to wait for the right moment. I want to make this one right." He opened the box. Inside was a ring unlike any she'd imagined. No oversized diamond, no flashy setting. Just a vintage gold band with a small sapphire nestled at its center. Deep blue and quietly brilliant. "Say yes, Madelyn." She stared at the ring, then at him. "You're not afraid this is too fast?" "I'm afraid of wasting time pretending we're not already everything." She nodded once, then again, tears slipping down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and pulled her into his arms. There was no applause, no grand audience, just the sound of their hearts realigning. They didn't announce it that day. They didn't need to. Months passed. In late summer, they married quietly on a cliffside in Greece, with only a handful of close friends and a small string quartet playing beneath the bougainvillea. She wore a simple white dress, barefoot in the sand. He wore no tie, no watch, just a soft smile that didn't fade all night. They bought a townhouse in Florence not for the status, but for the light. She wrote by the windows every morning. He worked with the foundation remotely, using his influence to fund artists, writers, and musicians who'd never had a voice. They kept a small apartment in New York, not far from the Prescott where it all started. Sometimes they'd walk past the hotel just to remember. One evening, as the sun dipped below the terracotta rooftops, she placed a final period on the manuscript that had begun on a crumpled notebook page. Van walked in carrying 2 glasses of wine and saw her leaning back in the chair, eyes closed. "You finished?" She nodded. "It's done." He handed her a glass. "To stories that almost didn't happen." She clinked her glass against his. "To the ones that did." They kissed beneath the open window, the breeze carrying in the hum of the city and the soft scent of jasmine from the garden below. And in that moment, with nothing between them but truth and time, Madelyn knew she had never been safer, never been braver, and never more in love. They didn't just get a happy ending. They built a beginning that never stopped unfolding.